Welcome into the North Carolina Sports Network. I'm Mike Waddell. He's David Glenn, and we're talking ACC basketball 2 months into the 4-month journey to Phoenix, the road to the Final Four. And David, right now, it's only North Carolina and Duke as the locks from the Atlantic Coast Conference to go to the field of 68. And with that, it's really a continuation of the whole financial talk that we've been going through with football and Florida State and everything that everybody remembers from the fall. Now it's the winter, and the financial repercussions of so few ACC teams making it to March Madness could be huge.
Yeah, Mike, that's a good way to put it. And obviously, we're going to get into why Duke and Carolina are in good position and why several others still have a chance to make the NCAA tournament from the ACC, but why a big chunk of the Atlantic Coast Conference already knows here in mid-January that the only way it would get in would be to go to the ACC tournament in Washington, D.C. this year and get that automatic bid, because the bottom half of this league right now is simply not very good. But to your point, when it comes to the financial repercussions, everybody realizes that it helps or hurt your league's brand to get a lot of teams into the tournament and then have them do well or not get many in. It's going to impact you brand-wise, reputation-wise. But a lot of people forget that it also impacts you financially. And for example, let's remember the run. There's a 6-year cycle where your payout from the NCAA paycheck, huge TV deal, of course, with CBS and Turner Sports for March Madness, every league gets a check every year based on that league's performance in the NCAA tournament over a 6-year period. So they actually count up, A, how many bids you got over that 6-year period, and they also calculate how many victories you got. There are some nitty-gritty details I won't get into, but it's both about getting teams in and having them do well that either allows your NCAA tournament money to surge in a good way or to dwindle in a bad way. And as you mentioned, the ACC is already under attack and has a lawsuit with Florida State as we speak about the fact that it has a below-market TV deal. When you think of the Atlantic Coast Conference's overall revenue, the number one item is that TV deal with ESPN. It makes up more than 70% of the league's annual revenue, just the TV deal. But among the other biggest revenue streams for a league like the ACC is NCAA tournament money. So if you think back to that 6-year stretch, remember in 2015, Duke won it all. In 2017, Carolina won it all. In 2019, UVA won it all. And in some of those in-between years where the ACC did not capture 3 out of 5 NCAA titles, that means at least those 3 teams won an awful lot of games those years, 6 to win it all. Even in the in-between years, remember, Carolina lost to Villanova in the NCAA title game in 2016. So that's still a lot of wins for the Tar Heels. Syracuse was also in the Final Four that year, representing the ACC. In 2018, ACC didn't win it all, but Duke and Florida State and Syracuse were in the Elite Eight. Clemson was in the Sweet 16. So that's another really good year, even though the ACC did not win it all. When they were crunching the numbers for that 6-year period, let's say 2014 to 2019, that was as big a check as any league has ever received in their cut of NCAA tournament money. Why? Because for that 6-year period, 2014 to 2019, that check probably arrived in 2020, just in time for the, COVID financial impact, which was perfect timing in that sense, but also a reflection of the ACC's brilliance, both getting a lot of teams into the NCAA tournament. They got 9 teams in 2017. They got 9 teams in 2018. Those are back-to-back years, the most NCAA bids in ACC history. If you're a 15-team league, 9 is pretty darn good. Well, guess what? That 2014 to 2019 stretch is fading into the past. And only those latter years are still part of the 6-year cycle that determines the size of your annual check from the NCAA men's basketball revenue. 2 years running, the ACC has had only 5 bids to the NCAA tournament. 5 this past spring, 5 the year before that. Obviously, even if you win some games, your total is probably not going to be as good as it was in those national championship years or those populate the Elite Eight years or populate the Sweet 16 years. So the ACC second largest revenue stream is in jeopardy as we speak. And here in mid-January, as you said, only Duke and North Carolina can feel great about their NCAA tournament chances here in 2024, whereas it's Clemson and Wake Forest and others that think they can get there and probably can, but have some work to do before that becomes a reality. Hey folks, David Glenn right here in Raleigh. One of my favorite restaurants for many years has been The Oak, Scratch Kitchen and Bourbon Bar. It's located on Lake Boone Trail, which happens to be a perfect location for a great meal and beverage if you're on your way to nearby Carter Finley Stadium or perhaps PNC Arena for a concert, Wolfpack or Hurricanes game, or other event. The menu is incredibly tasty and creative. The atmosphere is a lot of fun. The bourbon options are as high-end and varied as you'll find anywhere. The staff is super classy and first-rate, and I've just always loved the people, the food, and the overall vibe there. When I took Carolina Hurricanes owner Tom Dundon to lunch, yes, meaning the billionaire who owns the hockey team, I took him to The Oak. Seriously, it's that good. Learn more or make a reservation by visiting their website, theoakraleigh.com. That's theoakraleigh.com. Special thanks to Nick and Haley and their team for joining the family here at the David Glenn Show and the new North Carolina Sports Network.
David, why has there been such a drop-off in the quality of basketball in the Atlantic Coast Conference? We could go through and word salad this all together, but it's a very simple question. The ACC has gone from 9 teams to we're looking at maybe getting back to 5 again, and that's going to be a stretch.
I will say there's multiple answers to that question, but number one, it is cyclical. I've seen other times in ACC history where the league just didn't do well in the ACC, in the NCAA tournament for a few years in a row, but it bounced back. So it remains to be seen whether or not this is just a little bit of a down cycle. I'll also remind folks that it was just 2 years ago, 2022, where the ACC did get only 5 teams into the big dance, but Duke and Carolina were still dancing in the Final Four. So that's still a pretty good year. Miami was actually in the Elite Eight that year. So 3 of the Final 8 were from the ACC, even though only 5 teams got in. So maybe the overall story is not as bad as some describe it. Miami, of course, made the Final Four this past season. So it hasn't been all bad news in more recent years. But beyond the cyclical nature of things, I'd say two factors jump out. Number one, there was a stretch in ACC basketball history where Rick Pitino was the coach at Louisville, Hall of Famer. Jim Boeheim was the coach at Syracuse, Hall of Famer. Roy Williams was the coach at Carolina, Hall of Famer. Mike Krzyzewski was the coach at Duke, Hall of Famer. And some other legendary coaches were leading other ACC programs. All 4 of those guys have either retired, or in the case of Rick Pitino, obviously he's coaching at St. John's now. So none of them is the built-in recruiting magnet that just makes sure that those national championship caliber programs kind of try to continue to hit on all cylinders, or at least have great seasons. Now, to their credit, Hubert Davis has already taken the Tar Heels to a Final Four. John Shire's already taken the Blue Devils in 1 year to an ACC championship. So it's not like these guys have face planted. But when you lose enough legendary coaches, and even guys like Mike Bray, who had a lot of success at Notre Dame, is no longer there. A guy like Leonard Hamilton at Florida State, lots of success, but clearly at the end of his career. That coaching factor, I think, has brought the ACC back to earth a little bit. And then finally, I would add that the transfer portal era has contributed to more parity in college basketball. In other words, at a time where you pretty much needed to sign your share of prep All-Americans to compete for national titles, you needed your share of future NBA players. But whereas not all prep stars turn out well, history tells us that you better sign some McDonald's All-Americans and the like to have a chance to hang banners. In the age of immediate transfer eligibility and the ease of the portal, I think it's just made the ACC less special, and it has allowed some mid-majors and some non-traditional powers to build through the transfer portal to get older quickly, rather than under the old system. There were times before immediately eligible transfers where half your league might not be very good, and there was no microwave way to get good quickly. All that has changed in the transfer portal, immediate eligibility, name, image, likeness era. And I think it's allowed others to catch up to and sometimes even surpass the ACC's basketball product.
You know, one of the phenomena that I've tried to get a handle on over the last couple of weeks since we last talked about ACC basketball is something bad can happen one year, and then the next year something outstanding happens. North Carolina loses on the last second shot to Villanova in 2016, but they win it in 2017. Virginia loses to UMBC as a 1 seed, the first ever 1 seed to lose to a 16, but then comes back and wins the national championship the next year. And now North Carolina, as a preseason number 1, misses the tournament last year. Perhaps the biggest flop in the history of NCAA basketball in the modern era. And now Hubert Davis has this team playing very well. I didn't think it was going to happen this year. I was one of those guys that was saying, man, this is really going to be a bad one. Caleb Love left, but hey, Caleb's doing great out at the University of Arizona with Coach Rob. He's throwing up career highs and poster dunks left and right. And the Tar Heels look pretty darn good. And just like a point guard back in the day, my favorite Carolina point guard of all time, Kenny the Jet Smith, led that great Carolina team back in the day. Now it's Elliot Cadeau playing that pure point guard role. And North Carolina, you're talking more about R.J. Davis and Armando Bacot, and that's not a bad thing to me. What about you? What do you think about the Heels so far?
Well, I think they're the best team in the ACC until proven otherwise. Obviously, Duke will have something to say about that. But Hubert Davis, and we'll get to Elliot Cadeau a little bit later in my midseason All-ACC honors as well. We might get to Hubert too. But the Tar Heels are tougher this year. The Tar Heels are shooting better. They were dead last in the ACC in three-point shooting last year, so it didn't take much to improve. But they're a pretty good three-point shooting team this year with R.J. Davis on fire, but also Harrison Ingram, the Stanford transfer, shooting better from long range than at any time in his entire college career. And I think the better three-point shooting is a byproduct of better handling. Elliot Cadeau is a guy who at times this season has had a 3-to-1 assist-to-turnover ratio. That is what would make Dean Smith smile in the tradition of Kenny Smith or Kendall Marshall or Phil Ford or any of the other great point guards, many of whom at Carolina were also great assist men. With all due respect to both R.J. Davis, who I think is a candidate for All-American honors and ACC Player of the Year honors. He's not the only one, and we'll get to that later. But R.J. Davis, while brilliant at many things, is not a true point guard. Caleb Love, while talented and a big-time clutch shooter at times and a great dunker, as you mentioned, not a true point guard. And the Tar Heels tried to make it work chemistry-wise with the Love-Davis combination. And of course, they did have that magical run to the Final Four 2 years ago to the national title game. But more often than not in the last 2 years, that backcourt combination simply did not work. And rather than my opinion, here's some great evidence for you. When Elliot Cadeau is on the court, R.J. Davis shoots a lot better from three-point land. That's not the eyeball test. That's not my opinion. It is the cold, hard facts when you crunch the numbers. When Elliot Cadeau is not out there, R.J. Davis is a middling three-point shooter. Not horrible, not the 20-some% that Caleb Love fell into at times, but not the great three-point shooter that he can be. When Elliot Cadeau is on the court, and you can look at the numbers, R.J. Davis becomes one of the best three-point shooters in the entire ACC. That is not mere coincidence. It is a skill to not only get the ball to your teammate, but in a position and on time, the way a quarterback needs to hit his receiver, not in the general area. It helps if it's perfectly on time and if it helps with that football arrives between the numbers. Simplify it for me, the receiver says. Similarly, in basketball, it's one thing to find the open man. It's another thing to get him at the right time when he has some space without a defender in his grill. And when the ball arrives at a place, body position-wise, where it's easier for him to get that three-point shot or other shot off quickly and easily and without as much defensive pressure. Elliot Cadeau is really good at that in a way that none of those recent UNC guards was good at it. And it's making the pieces fit together for Carolina in a way that they did not at all last year and really did not for the first half of the previous year, Hubert Davis's rookie season with the Tar Heels. The Heels are also tougher. They defend harder. And after some midseason rebounding problems, I give credit to Hubert Davis. He called out Armando Bacot. He called out the personnel for not being tough enough on the boards against Kentucky and others. Well, guess what? The Heels have gotten better defensively. They've gotten better on the boards. Whatever hard work they're doing behind the curtain in practice is paying off in games. And as we said to start today, only UNC and Duke are in great position for the NCAA tournament. Mike, if you counted quad one wins, we saw UNC beat Tennessee. We saw UNC beat Oklahoma. Those are top 10 caliber opponents. We've seen Duke beat Baylor. We've seen Duke beat Michigan State. Those are top 25 or top 25-ish opponents. We've even seen Clemson beat Alabama. Clemson beat TCU. Those are top 25 caliber opponents. After those, and remember, we mentioned the Tigers as the next best positioned teams probably after the Tar Heels and the Blue Devils when it comes to what that NCAA tournament selection committee has to crunch in mid-March. After Carolina's great wins that I mentioned, Duke's great non-conference wins that I mentioned, Clemson's great non-conference wins that I mentioned, Virginia Tech has a couple. Virginia has one pretty good one. Boston College has one. Florida State has one. But even a Wake Forest, a pretty darn good team, doesn't have a single quad one victory right now. They beat Florida at home. That was in Winston-Salem. So at least right now, it's not considered a quad one win. One of the reasons we're discussing, to get back to our original topic, the ACC on this fragile surface, if you will, when it comes to NCAA tournament projections, is that only Carolina and Duke and maybe Clemson have those great non-conference wins. Virginia Tech does have a couple of good ones as well, Iowa State and Boise State. They're both quad one. But when you don't have a stronger top of the conference, now that we're in conference play the rest of the way, it's hard for the middle of the pack to build their resumes because only those wins over Duke and Carolina are automatically going to be quad one. And beating any of the other ACC teams, it might be quad one, especially if you beat them on the road. But the bottom ACC teams, it's not even going to be a quad one win if you do beat them at their place. That's what makes the rest of this precarious for the Atlantic Coast Conference. They have some really good non-conference wins, but they have enough non-conference losses, including by Carolina and Duke. Heels lost to UConn, Kentucky, and Villanova. Duke lost to Arizona at home and Arkansas on the road. Clemson lost to Memphis and recently dropped 3 straight ACC games. Virginia Tech lost to Auburn by 17. They lost to Florida Atlantic, the Hokies, by 34. They also lost to a middle-of-the-road South Carolina team on a neutral court. Wake Forest lost to Georgia and LSU. All of those were missed opportunities in the non-conference schedule to go along with those notable victories. And it adds up to kind of a middling non-conference resume that's going to make it tricky for the ACC to get to that point where it could feel more confident of 5 or 6 or 7 NCAA tournament bids instead of the really ugly numbers that would be the case if it was only 4 or 5. Hey folks, David Glenn here. I cannot offer a greater endorsement or a bigger compliment than telling you about the folks that I use for important matters in my own life. That's the case with the Lawson Insurance Group, led by 3 actual brothers, Ken Lawson, Miller Lawson, and Michael Lawson. These guys operate a very successful family-oriented business right here in Raleigh, and that office happens to be one of those beautiful blends of NC State grads and UNC grads and graduates, fans and supporters of other colleges and universities all over North Carolina. I know these guys, I trust these guys, and I send these guys my own insurance business and that of my family. The next time you have insurance needs, I hope you'll do the same. The Lawson Insurance Group is known for its commitment to community and its dedication to ensuring that North Carolinians and their businesses are prepared for life's inevitable challenges, with the reminder that as a High Street insurance partner, Lawson Insurance Group offers local expertise and support that, combined with High Street's extensive national resources, means more choice and support for you as their client. As we speak, Miller Lawson's helping the Glenn family with our auto insurance needs, and Ken Lawson is the guy to call for your commercial insurance needs. If you Google High Street Lawson Insurance, their website will be the first to pop up.
The quad one wins, the net ratings, the this and that and the other. We just went through a college football season, and now a lawsuit from Florida State against the ACC trying to eject themselves from league membership, at least in some part related to their not being selected, the Seminoles not going to the college football playoff. And everybody gets mad at the committee and about these ratings and about these criteria. If you're upset about college football, how can you not be completely confused by the word salad that everybody puts out? Joe Lunardi, what you just said right there, everything about all these wins, because it doesn't make sense that one win could be one thing one day and could be something totally different the next. It seems like a moving thing back and forth, and the big loser in football, the Atlantic Coast Conference. And now in basketball, potentially the Atlantic Coast Conference. When the hell did it get so complicated?
Maybe it's always been fairly complicated. Obviously, any win over any opponent can be a moving target, right? In football, if you beat a team that's 2-0 in the month of September, but they go on to finish 2-10, that's not a very good win. If you beat that same team in September that's 2-0 and they go on to finish 10-2, and one of their only two losses is to you, that's a heck of a win, right? So that's what we mean by the fluid nature of a win or a loss, and that's not a new concept. But it is something to keep in mind. If you're an ACC fan, you want all of these wins that are in the books already. Carolina over Tennessee, Carolina over Oklahoma, Duke over Baylor, Duke over Michigan State, Clemson over Alabama, Clemson over TCU, Virginia Tech over Iowa State, Virginia Tech over Boise State. Well, right now, Virginia beat Florida and Wake beat Florida. If the Gators crash, those are not great wins. If the Gators get better between now and Selection Sunday, maybe those become better-looking wins for the Cavaliers and the Demon Deacons, two teams that certainly have not and should not give up on their NCAA tournament hopes, even though the Deacs would be a bubble team right now and the Cavaliers would be on the outside looking in all likelihood. There's a long way to go. The scary part, again, is that you just don't have chances at any more non-conference victories of any caliber. It's all ACC games almost the rest of the way. Plus the ACC tournament, of course, is only ACC opponents. So again, everybody not named Duke and Carolina knows that if they could beat the Heels or the Devils in this coming 2-month period, that is an absolute crown jewel on their resume. But these other opponents that the ACC provides, when you don't have the quality depth that the ACC has had for most of my 37 years covering it, a lot of times if you beat the 5th or 6th best team in the ACC, home or away, that was a big-time win for your resume. Beating the 5th or 6th best team in the ACC this year, home or away, maybe it polishes, doesn't hurt your resume, maybe it uplifts it a little bit, but we're at that stage, Mike, where every time you play a bottom team, if you play a Notre Dame, which is playing very hard for its new coach, Micah Shrewsbury, if you play a Louisville, which is a bad team again, but guess what? Jim Laranaga's Miami team lost at home to the very bad Louisville Cardinals. So you end up with these games where you can't really win. Beating Louisville is not going to help your resume, but you can lose. I mean, literally lose the game, but also hurt your resume by losing to the Notre Dame or the Louisville or someone else in that bottom tier of the ACC. That's how tricky this stuff is. That formula is not going to change between now and Selection Sunday. And that's why, I'm a glass half full guy. I still think the ACC has a chance because of good coaches and good players to end up with 5 or 6 NCAA tournament bids. Long way to go. But right now, Duke and Carolina would be in. Clemson, in my opinion, would be in. Wake might be in. And then there's 3 or 4 teams that know that they're good enough to make a run at an NCAA tournament bid, but they need to do the work to make that happen.
Back when you and I first started covering ACC basketball, the big thing at North Carolina was the streak of 20-win seasons. Okay? Now that 20-win barrier is really not the magic number. Just like in football, it used to be that if you won 8 games, it was good enough. And in some people's minds, that is still good enough. But if you win 8 games playing a 12-game schedule, you're winning 66% of your games. And in any school in the world, that's an F. Okay, it's not that bad, but it's not what it used to be. In this modern day and age of basketball, quick answer on this, since we got a lot to get to, but I just had to ask you this. What does that 20-win barrier mean anymore? Because there'll be a lot of teams that win 20 games because of schedule padding and this and that and the other that don't make the tournament. Is that why we've gotten into this complicated algebraic equation to try to determine good win, bad win, good team, bad team?
Yeah, the 20-win threshold, I mean, it means you won a good number of games, but the content of those 20 or more wins is what matters most. We're living in a world now where the first things the NCAA Tournament Selection Committee, I think the first thing that they look at is your best wins, right? So Carolina's best wins, no matter what happens the rest of the way, are pretty darn impressive. They beat Tennessee. They beat Oklahoma, et cetera. They beat Clemson. They went on the road and beat Pitt. Those are solid wins, right? But they have the crown jewel wins, just like Duke has the win over Baylor, the win over Michigan State, and others. Just like Clemson has the win over Alabama, the win over TCU, and others. Wake has a nice resume, but needs some signature victories. Virginia Tech isn't dead yet. They're playing middling basketball, the Hokies, but they have Iowa State in the bag already. They have Boise State in the bag already. They beat a good Clemson team, the Hokies did. So Mike Young's squad still has the glimmer of hope based in part on their best wins. The second thing they look at, Mike, are bad losses, which can really weigh you down. So it's less about the numerical threshold of wins, and it's more about the devil being in the details. What is the identity of your best handful of wins, and how bad are your worst losses? Those are the first two questions, and that applies whether you won 18 games, 20 games, or even 25 games.
Again, we're at the halfway point of the 2023-24 college basketball season. David Glenn, Mike Waddell here on the North Carolina Sports Network, and we're talking ACC basketball. But let's go inside some of the superlatives that might come up as we get towards March in the ACC tournament in Washington, D.C. Let's start out with your 2023-24 ACC midseason Rookie of the Year. Who's the best rookie in the ACC this season?
Well, thank you for labeling it midseason, because I want to underline that and put it in bold letters, whether it's Coach of the Year, Player of the Year, Freshman of the Year, et cetera. It is really, really important to emphasize that it's our mid-season fill in the blank. We have an opportunity to revise our pick. You have an opportunity to revise your picks out there in listener and viewer land. I think the starting point really is a pair of guards. Marcus Burton on a bad Notre Dame team is playing lights out basketball. He's averaging 15 or 16 points a game. He's got the ball in his hands all the time. He rarely leaves the court. And the Irish, while not a postseason candidate in all likelihood, are playing tough, smart basketball. They're threatening teams. They took NC State to the wire in South Bend, and they've posted some nice victories already. So I think Marcus Burton would be 1A on my Freshman of the Year list. But let's shout out another point guard. And this is a weird world, Mike, because unlike for decades, really, where the superstar freshman was almost always a McDonald's All-American or other prep star, well decorated from the high school ranks. Because of the transfer portal, fewer freshmen have big roles. Even the more talented freshmen, Duke, Carolina, or otherwise, have to wait their turn in a sense, or even if they're playing a lot or even starting, they're almost never anymore the star of the team. Carlton, they call him Bub Carrington, is Pitt's point guard for Jeff Capel. He's up there in that 14, 15 points a game range. Like Burton, he's a good ball handler, a good distributor, a smart basketball player, a tough basketball player. I can see why Coach Shrewsbury and Coach Capel fell in love with Marcus Burton and Carlton Bub Carrington on the recruiting trail. As true freshmen, they are having huge positive impacts on their teams. And there are other good freshmen. Cadeau at Carolina, Jared McCain, the guard at Duke, Bay Dongo, the forward, 6'9", really athletic and skilled forward at Georgia Tech, also would be on my 5-man all-freshman team. But it's Marcus Burton at 1A and Carlton Carrington at 1B for my ACC freshman of the year right now.
What about your ACC newcomer of the year? This could be somebody out of that portal that you talked about, a transfer player. Who is the best newcomer in the ACC this year?
I'd say my 1A and 1B there would be Hunter Salas of Wake Forest and Harrison Ingram of North Carolina. Statistically, Hunter Salas has been off the charts. He is part point guard, part combo guard, part push the ball, smart player, tough player, but can flat out put the biscuit in the basket for Steve Forbes and the Demon Deacons. If the Deacs make the NCAA tournament, which I think they will, and I frankly hope they will, Hunter Salas, the Gonzaga transfer, is going to be a big part of that. I thought it was interesting that Steve Forbes, the Wake coach, mentioned that one of the things he looks for in transfers, and keep in mind, that guy's been a transfer whisperer, right? Tyree Appleby of the Florida Gators was the Demon Deacons point guard last year and the Associated Press's version of the ACC Player of the Year. A couple years ago, it was Alondis Williams from Oklahoma State, who was the ACC Player of the Year in a Demon Deacons uniform. So this year's version of that is kind of multi-tiered, as Coach Forbes has done with Jake LaRavia and others in the past major college transfers. Hunter Salas is a difference maker for the Deacs on the perimeter, just like the somewhat recently eligible transfer, the big man, also a Gonzaga transfer, Efton Reed III, is a wonderful newcomer, not a candidate for ACC Newcomer of the Year. He missed part of the season, and he's a little bit more of a role player, but a very important role player, defender, rebounder, solid scorer. But that's two more examples of how Wake has hit the transfer portal with success. So I'd put Hunter Salas at 1A, and I would put Harrison Ingram of the Tar Heels at 1B for my newcomer of the year. He is one of the toughest players in the ACC, one of the better defenders in the ACC. He has worked his tail off on his outside shot. Not a good three-point shooter at Stanford. 40+% with the Tar Heels, thanks in part to the Heels' Elliot Cadeau, RJ Davis sharing the ball, putting guys in position to take a little bit less complicated three-point shots. That's one of the reasons Davis's percentages are up. It's one of the reasons that Harrison Ingram's percentages are up. Harrison Ingram will defend you to the death. He does not give up on his assignment. And he's long-armed, 6'8" or 9" or whatever they list him as, NBA prospect. He has added grit, toughness, and a little bit of an alpha male personality to the Tar Heels that they lacked. Heels had horrendously bad body language in their disappointing season of a year ago. Harrison Ingram plays like he owns your court, home or away. He doesn't give a rat's behind whether he's getting booed or cheered or whatever. He doesn't care if the Heels are up 10, down 10. He is going to get in your grill and unapologetically play hard and dare you to beat him and dare you to stop him. And the Heels desperately needed the toughness and grit and that alpha mentality that Harrison Ingram has provided. So some of that is intangibles, but the guy also rebounds. He scores. He hits threes. I mean, he is a defender. There's practical applications to Hunter Ingram and more of that psychological application as well. Again, Hunter Salas of Wake, 1A for newcomer of the year. Harrison Ingram of the Tar Heels, 1B here at the mid-season point. Obviously, they'll be two of the best candidates when we cast the official ballot in mid-March.
So it sounds like you're saying that Harrison Ingram is the 2024 version of the 2022 Brady Manick. Because the one thing that you said right there, I'll be very clear about this. Carolina didn't have an alpha last year. They had a lot of betas that were wandering around looking for somebody to take control. And by default, the only guy who really wanted to step up and take control was Caleb Love, and that didn't work out so well. Now he's in a better environment. He's doing a great job, but Ingram is the new Manic. And the best thing about Ingram is he has more tread on his tires, so he's going to be around a lot more than just 1 year. So if you go out and you buy that 55 jersey, chances are you're going to be able to wear it for a few years to dismiss it.
Yeah, I would say their impacts have both been incredibly positive as transfers. I would just say they do it in dramatically different ways, because Brady Manick was a very soft-spoken, sort of lower-key personality, both on and off the court. Now, the guy could flat out shoot the rock. And if you're as he's showing in the professional ranks overseas, when you're 6'10", and you can catch and shoot it quickly and with precision, you're going to make a lot of money as a pro basketball player, even if it doesn't turn out to be in the NBA. So Manick added confidence to his teammates. He was also a pretty good passer and an unselfish guy, so he helped the chemistry of the Tar Heels. Ingram does hit threes, does help chemistry, is unselfish. But I think Ingram, along with the Notre Dame transfer, Cormac Ryan, who's not shooting very well and maybe isn't statistically where he wants to be after some good years at Notre Dame, Ryan adds that I will defend you to the death, long-armed, get in a stance, battle you in a way that, frankly, Caleb Love kind of ebbed and flowed at how much he wanted to battle you, how much he wanted to dive for a loose ball. That was extremely inconsistent in Caleb Love's personality. It is not inconsistent in the personality of Harrison Ingram or Cormac Ryan. Again, Manick, I think, did it more with skill. Ingram is doing it with more of a combination of skill and just toughness and intensity and unapologetic, in-your-face approach to playing basketball.
What about your midseason player of the year? Going in, everybody thought it was going to be one person, but is it that one guy?
If you mean Armando Bacot, I don't think it's him. Armando is having a good year. I mean, if you're averaging a double-double in points and rebounds in the ACC, you're going to be probably a first-team All-ACC guy, meaning one of those five on the first team. But I see it as a two-man race right now, again, with an asterisk. We're calling this the midseason ACC Player of the Year. These guys have a lot of games to play. There are other really good players, including Bacot, including P.J. Hall of Clemson. The Tigers' big man has been having a fantastic year. But to me, the only realistic candidates for midseason ACC Player of the Year are also the ACC's only realistic candidates for first or second team All-American at this point. And that's Kyle Filipowski of Duke and R.J. Davis of Carolina. Davis has been a very good player for a couple years now. He has become an elite player this year. He is tough. He is consistent. He has become an elite 20-point per game or more scorer. First guy since Tyler Hansborough, more than a decade ago at Carolina, to have, I think it was 8 or 9 straight games of 20 or more points. He has become the best free throw shooter in the history of UNC basketball, R.J. Davis, for his career. On the season, he's one of the best in the entire country, well over 90%. And one thing that does, I mean, you might say it's only free throws. Well, A, he gets to the line a lot. He's a bulldog of a guard who attacks the basket a lot. He also has the ball in his hands at the end of close games where opponents have to foul somebody. So the Heels want it to be R.J. Davis, who's going to shoot 90+% from the line. I think it also gives him a little extra space in three-point land, because every defender knows you don't want to foul that guy. He's going to make all 3 of those free throws. He might get a little more room as a guy who's only 6 foot tall and his drives to the basket, because, again, every defender knows if you foul the guy, it's 2 points a different way, 1+1. So you have to defend him with that in mind, and that benefits R.J. Davis, who's playing by far the best basketball of his career. If push came to shove and you made me pick between my top 2, I would take Kyle Filipowski of Duke. And I say that because whereas R.J. Davis is a brilliant offensive player and a nice defensive player, works hard, tries hard, but he's only 6 feet tall. He doesn't have long arms, and he just has limited ability at the defensive end of the floor. And again, he's trying hard. He gets steals. He battles you, taking nothing away from R.J. Davis. I enjoy watching him as I enjoy watching any player in the Atlantic Coast Conference. But Kyle Filipowski impacts truly every possession at the defensive end of the floor that lasts more than a few seconds. He's a 7-footer who's agile enough to switch out on the perimeter, but obviously tall enough that anything coming near the rim, he's no Sheldon Williams, Duke legend, but Kyle Filipowski is one of the best shot blockers in the ACC. He also has pretty good hands, so he can get some steals. He's good on help defense. So at the defensive end of the floor, Filipowski is brilliant. And at the offensive end of the floor, he is brilliant. I mean, how many 7-footers, Mike, in 71 years of ACC basketball history have the skill to not only catch and score in the post, which is mostly what we see from 7-footers over those 70-plus years, but also can hit a three or catch the ball on the perimeter and beat his man off the dribble for a high percentage shot in the lane. However long that list is of 7-footers who can do all those things offensively, it ain't a long list. And I mean at any school in the history of the ACC. Filipowski is a mentally tough player. When they need a stop, they lean on him defensively. When they need a bucket, they lean on him or usually Jeremy Roach offensively. He was the freshman of the year last year in the ACC, of course, and deservedly so. He was an all-ACC player as a true freshman and deservedly so. And I think he's gotten better as a sophomore. And to me, he is the ACC midseason player of the year who's going to be battling RJ Davis for that overall player of the year over these next 2 months.
And the midseason sports medicine group of the year would be Duke because they got Kyle Filipowski back on the court to where he's playing at this high level after popping his hip socket out, shading it down, and making it fit right. So that's a pretty good thing. We heard that from him at the ACC tip-off back in October. Last but not least, probably the most irrelevant at this point in the season, superlative that we'll talk about in our midseason ACC awards, is Coach of the Year. Because you said it earlier, UNC and Duke, they're supposed to be where they are right now. It doesn't discount the job being done by Hubert Davis or John Shire, but it does open up the possibility of some coach out there, Leonard Hamilton, Mike Young, you never know, Steve Forbes, somebody could pull a big thing coming up here in the last half of the year. Brad Brownell, hey, this one could be wide open, and it really makes this a fun ACC season to watch because of that very thing. Somebody's going to make a run.
Yeah, I'm a big believer that Coach of the Year should reflect some form of greatness, and that usually does mean putting yourself in position to make the NCAA tournament. I mean, I've never been a subscriber to the idea that you look at the media's preseason predictions and whatever coach finished high, the most slots above the prediction somehow gets the award. With all due respect to former Georgia Tech coach Josh Pastner, who's a nice guy and a great interview and did have a very good year with the Yellow Jackets the year he won ACC Coach of the Year, the Yellow Jackets weren't even close to being an NCAA tournament team. It was the classic mistake of just giving it to the coach whose team was supposed to be horrific and turned out to be mediocre instead of horrific. I mean, that is an accomplishment, don't get me wrong. Overachieving is always an accomplishment that should be celebrated, but there's almost never a season where somebody who puts their team in position to make the NCAA tournament didn't have a great year. And with that in mind, Wake Forest Steve Forbes is a candidate for midseason Coach of the Year. Clemson's Brad Brownell is a candidate for midseason Coach of the Year. I actually think John Shire and Hubert Davis are the other two best candidates for midseason Coach of the Year. Because the Deeks are on the bubble, I can't yet put my midseason Coach of the Year award on Steve Forbes. Again, I have my eye on him for the actual Coach of the Year award at the end of the year. Clemson is in good shape, but not great shape. So I'm not going to give it to Brad Brownell either. One of those other guys you mentioned may surprise us with an amazing second half of the regular season. But for now, I think the midseason Coach of the Year is Hubert Davis, in part for taking the Tar Heels where many did not expect them to be after last year's chemistry disaster. And as you mentioned earlier, Mike, the only preseason number one in the history of college basketball to fail to make the NCAA tournament entirely, at least in the era where, more than one team per conference could make the NCAA tournament. So that's almost 50 years now. That was a train wreck. And remember, Hubert Davis was putting together puzzle pieces And this is what impresses me most. Two things impress me most about the job he's done to this point. And we don't know where the Heels are going to go from here, and that's why Hubert Davis is only my midseason coach of the year. I reserve the right to change that vote just like all the others. But number one, Hubert Davis has only a handful of guys back, and the most recent thing they experienced was a train wreck. It was the sinking of the Titanic. So the most recent thing on the mind of R.J. Davis or Armando Bacot or Seth Trimble or Jalen Washington or anyone else who went through that disaster of a year ago was a negative thing. The most recent thing on the mind of Notre Dame transfer Cormac Ryan was a disastrous season at Notre Dame that led to Mike Bray losing his job. I know they didn't describe it as a firing, but he didn't have the choice to stay. So to me, that's as close to a firing as you get without calling it a firing. So that's some negativity surrounding a good player, Cormac Ryan, but it's not like he's coming in from a school that just won a conference championship or just went to the Final Four. Similarly, Harrison Ingram was on some bad teams at Stanford. So you're taking your key Carolina players, your two highest profile transfers. Oh, by the way, Jalen Withers, another rotation player for the Tar Heels, was on one of the worst teams in Louisville basketball history last year. Not an exaggeration. Mike, that's a lot of losing. That's a lot of negativity. I remember Coach Williams telling me, DG, everybody talks about experience, and experience is important. But he used the phrase, experienced success is what matters. It's hard to be automatically successful if the last 2 years you spent were on bad teams. Yeah, you're experienced, but you experienced a lot of losing. Experienced success is the better phrase. And at least in terms of last season to this season, almost all of the Tar Heels key players just didn't have it. In fact, they were coming off of something that might have been psychologically damaging or threatening. Hubert Davis put those damaged puzzle pieces together in a way that enabled them to put together this amazing first half of their season where the Tar Heels have one of the 5 best resumes in all of college basketball, including those great wins that I described earlier. And they even battled to the end in a couple of those close losses against other teams ranked among the best in America, UConn, for example. The second thing was when the Heels were not very good on defense and not very good on the boards, Hubert Davis called it out publicly, called it out privately, went to work in practice specifically on rebounding and defense. Lo and behold, that UNC team that was good but not great in losing to Kentucky or UConn or Villanova got better on defense by a lot, got better especially on the boards by a lot. And that has been fundamental to this higher caliber of play that the Heels have had here in 2024 and even the end of December. That's part coaching. Credit to the players as well, right? R.J. Davis is a Player of the Year candidate. Harrison Ingram is a Newcomer of the Year candidate. Elliot Cadeau is an all-freshman team candidate. Talent, of course, matters. Experience does matter. This is an old UNC team in terms of just their numerical ages and the number of years they've played college basketball. I think this is year 5 for Bacot, year 6, I believe, in college for Cormac Ryan, 5 or 6. These guys have been around the block, but a lot of those trips around the block were on losing teams. And Hubert Davis had to take those broken puzzle pieces and try to make something special out of them. And to this point, that's exactly what he's done. And that's why Hubert Davis is my midseason ACC Coach of the Year.
One note about Hubert Davis and his coaching job so far, and it's a direct reaction from what I've heard and read from a lot of ACC media people about Elliot Cadeau. Early in the season, a lot of talking heads were, yep. Cadeau needs to start. Cadeau needs to start. But they missed that point that you said that you heard from Roy Williams, a Hall of Famer. Experience success. Elliot Cadeau should be in high school right now. And Hubert Davis had the wherewithal, the maturity, and the patience to not start him. He didn't go into the starting lineup until Ryan went down with that ankle injury. But he was able to watch the game come to him. And it reminds me of something that John Wooden told me one time, one-on-one in Kansas City at the first ever induction ceremony of the College Basketball Hall of Fame. He told me that patience, it was an old thing that my dad used to say, Patience is a virtue, but it doesn't matter who starts the game. It matters who finishes the game. And it's the biggest fugazi in all of sports. Who starts? Who's going to be in the starting 5 or who's going to be in the starting 11 or whatever the number is for whatever the sport is. It doesn't matter. It's who's on the floor when it counts. And that's where I give Hubert Davis massive kudos for the job that he's done this season. We have parting shot right here from you, DG. First half of the ACC season here in 23-24. What's your final word as we close out this edition?
Well, I give credit. It feels like we're back to where we've been for so many of my 37 years covering the ACC. It's a Duke and Carolina conversation, and then hope other teams become more interesting than they are right now. I'm fascinated by the Wake Forest story. They haven't made the NCAA tournament at all under Steve Forbes, at all for many years. I think it was 2017 under Danny Manning, and that was only one trip in many, many years for a passionate basketball fan base that includes a lot of people I've gotten to know. So I like to see them happy. And it's been a long time that they've been NCAA tournament happy at Wake Forest. I think this is one of the best teams Brad Brownell has had in his, I think it's 14 years now at Clemson. He had one of the best Clemson teams in school history when he went to the Sweet 16 a handful of years ago. This is the other of his best teams in 14 years at Clemson. So I think the Deacs and the Tigers are going to make the NCAA tournament if I had to predict today. Whether this is deemed another down year for the ACC or something better than that really depends on everybody else. Can Virginia Tech build on those couple of great wins from early in the season that I mentioned earlier and become a candidate for the NCAA tournament, which they're not really right now? Can Miami, which has talent and was in, just had the 2 best seasons in school history. Seriously, the last 2 years under Jim Larrañaga were the 2 best seasons in Canes basketball history. Can he, and he's a heck of a coach, can he put the pieces together in a way that the Canes become a valid NCAA tournament contender, which they are not right now? Can somebody else do it? UVA, of course, under Tony Bennett is always a candidate for that. And there are others. This is a solid, intriguing league. But for now, it is Duke and Carolina and everybody else, or Carolina and Duke and everybody else, if you want to put it that way. I would argue that probably 5 of the 10 best players in this league play for either the Tar Heels or the Blue Devils. But there are other really good players in this league, other good coaches in this league. So as a guy who's covered this league, and it's my primary league that I cover, of course, even though we at the North Carolina Sports Network love to cover college basketball at all 19 of our in-state programs, this is the most prominent league in our part of the country, one of the most prominent in the history of college basketball. And there's a big difference between getting 3 or 4 teams in the big dance and getting, the 5 or 6 or 7. We know it's not going to be one of those vintage 8 or 9 years in all likelihood. But I just hope that these players and coaches become the better versions of themselves than we have seen so far. As we said, we're only halfway through the regular season journey, and there's plenty of time to get it done, but there just are only so many quad 1 victories left on the schedules, and that's what makes it kind of fingernail biting time for Commissioner Jim Phillips and these athletic directors who depend on NCAA tournament money in part to pay their bills, but also are tired of hearing about the ACC is not what it was, especially in that 2015 to 2019 era, where, again, it was Duke and Carolina and UVA winning 3 NCAA titles in a 5-year period. That's about as good as it gets in modern college basketball history for any single league. And the ACC simply has been something much less than that more recently, COVID and beyond. And it's going to take special teams, at least a couple, maybe 3 or 4 at the top, to change that narrative between now and the end of March Madness.
That's David Glenn, the guy who knows more about ACC basketball than anybody on the planet. You find him right here on the North Carolina Sports Network. That's ncsportsnetwork.com. Great website, previews, and continuing coverage of all 19 Division I programs here in the Old North State. You can find us on YouTube and Instagram and TikTok and Twitter at the NC Sports Net. For David Glenn, I'm Mike Waddell. We'll see you again soon right here all across the Old North State on the North Carolina Sports Network.